Isabella, answer me. Why are there strangers living in the Alpine chalet I bought for you 3 years ago? My grandmother Margaret's voice didn't just cut through the room, it surgically removed the oxygen from it. It was Christmas Eve, the kind you see on greeting cards, snow falling softly on the aspen pines outside, a fire roaring in the hearth that cost more than my entire year's rent, but inside, the temperature had just dropped to absolute zero. Grandma slammed her crystal wine glass onto the mahogany table. It didn't break, but the sound was like a gunshot. The heavy thud echoed off the vaulted ceilings, lingering in the sudden, suffocating silence. Across the table, my father, Ryan, stopped mid-laugh. His mouth was open, a piece of roast duck hovering halfway to his lips on a silver fork. Beside him, my mother, Elizabeth, froze. Her eyes, usually so composed and calculating, widened in a panic I had never seen before. It was the look of a trapped animal realizing the cage door has just swung shut. I sat there, gripping my napkin until my knuckles turned white. I was shivering, but not from the cold. I was wearing a thin, synthetic sweater I'd picked up at a thrift store for $4 because I couldn't afford to turn the heat up in my apartment. I looked at Grandma, then at my parents, completely confused. Grandma? I whispered. My voice sounded small, trembling in the vast, expensive room. What chalet? I don't own a chalet. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. I live in a damp basement apartment on the east side, Grandma. You know this. The one where the windows don't quite close. I've never owned a house in my life. Grandma Margaret didn't blink. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits that gleamed with a dangerous intelligence. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at my parents. You told me you were managing it for her, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming terrifyingly calm. You told me the renters were temporary. You told me the money was going into a blind trust for her future. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with secrets. Before I tell you what my father said next, I need you to understand something. If you're listening to this and you've ever been the black sheep, the one who was made to feel like you were the problem, drop a comment saying, "I'm still standing." Let me know where you're watching from. I want to know who is in this community, because what happens next, well, let's just say it's for all of us who were told we weren't enough. My father, Ryan, finally moved. He laughed nervously, a hollow, brittle sound that grated on my ears. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed napkin. Mother, please, he said, his smile twitching at the corners. You've been in Europe for years. You're confused. The altitude is getting to you. It's a corporate retreat structure now. We're renting it out to manage the overhead costs for Isabella's future. These properties are money pits, you know that. No, Grandma snapped. The word cracked like a whip. I went there yesterday. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. I drove up there myself, Grandma continued, her gaze locking onto my father like a radar lock. The people inside were very nice. They invited me in for tea. They said, "Oh, you must be related to the Hansons." They told me they are the in-laws of your daughter, Sydney. I turned to look at my sister, Sydney. She was sitting to my right, scrolling on her phone under the table. She froze. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that I knew for a fact cost $800, more than my car was worth. Her face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Grandma leaned forward. They said they pay $6,000 a month in rent. And they write the check directly to Ryan Hansen. The room spun. I actually had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling out of my chair. $6,000 a month. I did the math instantly, involuntarily. My bank account currently had exactly $15.42 in it. I had skipped lunch today to afford the gas to drive here. I had spent the last 3 years eating instant noodles, patching my boots with duct tape, and losing sleep over a $40 increase in my utility bill. I looked at Sydney. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at her plate, pushing a glazed carrot around with her fork. In the past, I would have cried. That was my role in this family. For 26 years, I had been the emotional one. The unlucky one. The one who wasn't good with money, the one who couldn't hold down a real corporate job, the artist who needed to be managed. I believed them. God, I believed them for so long. I internalized their narrative until it became my reality. I thought my inability to get ahead was a personal failing, a character flaw that I needed to fix. When I couldn't make rent, I blamed myself. When my car broke down and I couldn't afford the repairs, I told myself I should have worked harder. That was the invisible chain they had wrapped around my neck, the constant, subtle suggestion that I was broken and they were my saviors. But looking at my father's sweating forehead and my mother's sheer terror, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a lock clicking open. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't my incompetence. This was theft. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table, though I wanted to. Instead, the lines of the room sharpened. It was like a high-contrast filter had been applied to my vision. I could see every pore on my father's face, every tremble in my mother's hands. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, turning my blood to ice water. It was the clarity of a balance sheet finally balancing. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly into a square, and placed it next to my untouched plate. "Dad," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, low, and vibrating with a power I didn't know I possessed. "Did you sign a lease with Brandon's parents in my name?" "It's complicated, Bella," my mother Elizabeth interjected quickly. Her voice was high and shrill, pitchy with desperation. "We were protecting the asset. You know how overwhelmed you get with paperwork. You know how you get anxious about bills. We didn't want to burden you with property taxes and maintenance fees." "Answer the question," I said, cutting her off. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes glued to my father. "Did you forge my signature on a lease for a property I didn't even know I owned?" The silence that followed was loud. It was screaming. Sydney dropped her fork. It clattered against the fine china, a harsh, discordant note that signaled the cracking of their perfect facade. "We didn't forge anything," Sydney stammered, defensive now, her chin jutting out in that bratty way she had since we were kids. "You signed a power of attorney years ago. Remember? When you had that car accident?" I stared at her. The memory washed over me like a bucket of cold sludge. "The car accident?" I repeated slowly. "The accident where I was in the hospital for 3 weeks? The one where you guys told me you couldn't help with the medical bills because the family was cash poor at the moment? The accident that ruined my credit score and put me in debt I'm still paying off?" My mind raced back to that time. I was 22. I was on morphine and terrified. My father had shoved a stack of papers in front of me, telling me they needed to handle my insurance claims. I had signed them blindly, trusting them. Because that's what you do with family. You trust them. "They used my vulnerability," I whispered, the realization hitting me in the chest. "You used my trauma to steal my future." "We didn't steal anything." Ryan slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. The vein in his neck was bulging. "We managed it. You were unstable after the accident. Depressed. Anxious. We couldn't trust you with that kind of responsibility. A property like that requires upkeep, management, investment. We rented it out to keep it safe." "Safe?" Grandma Margaret finally spoke again. She hadn't moved. She was watching the scene unfold with the grim satisfaction of a judge watching a guilty man hang himself. You charged Brandon's parents $6,000 a month. That is $72,000 a year. For 3 years. She leaned forward, picking up her wine glass again, swirling the red liquid ominously. That is over $200,000, Ryan, she said softly. Where is that money? Is it safe? Or is it sitting in the driveway in the form of that new Range Rover you drove here in? The heir left the room. $200,000. I looked at my parents. I really looked at them. For the first time, I didn't see the successful businessman and the elegant socialite. I saw parasites. They were wearing expensive clothes and eating expensive food, but they were rot. They had fed on my failure to justify their own greed. They needed me to be the screw-up. They needed me to be poor. Because if I was capable, if I was successful, they would have no excuse to take what was mine. You owe me, I said. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. Every penny of rent. Every penny of interest. And the deed. Tonight. We can't, Elizabeth sobbed, finally breaking. She put her face in her hands. The money is gone. Gone? Grandma Margaret repeated the word like it was a foreign object, something foul she had tasted. $200,000. Gone. It's expensive to maintain our lifestyle. Ryan shouted, abandoning all pretense of calm. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Do you have any idea what it costs to keep up appearances in these circles? The club memberships? The cars? The vacations? People expect things from the Hanson family. We have a reputation to uphold. We did it for you girls. Elizabeth wailed, clutching her pearls so hard I thought the string would snap. So you could have the right connections. So you could marry well. You mean so Sydney could marry well? I said, my voice dripping with a disdain I didn't know I was capable of. I wasn't part of that plan, was I? I was just the fuel you burned to keep her warm. You were always so difficult. Ryan spat, pointing a trembling finger at me across the table. Always so emotional. So sensitive. We knew you'd just blow the money on some artistic nonsense. You wanted to go to design school. We were protecting the asset for the future of the real family legacy. I stood up. My legs felt strong. Stronger than they had in years. Grandma, I said, not taking my eyes off my father. What time is it? Grandma Margaret reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out a watch. She pulled out her phone. It's time, she said into the receiver. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open with a crash. A gust of wind blew snow into the warm room, swirling around the polished floorboards. And from the darkness of the hallway, a figure stepped in. He was shaking the snow from a dark wool overcoat. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. He didn't look like a Christmas guest. He looked like an executioner in a bespoke suit. My father's face went white. Walter, he rasped. What are you doing here? Mr. Walter, the family's most feared corporate attorney, a man my father had always spoken of with terrified reverence, stepped into the light. He placed the briefcase on the sideboard with a heavy, final thud. Good evening, Mr. Walter said. His voice was devoid of warmth. I believe we have some business to conclude. And Ryan? You might want to sit down for this. This is a private family dinner, Walter, my father stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to muster some authority, but he just looked like a man trying to hold back a landslide with an umbrella. You have no right to barge in here. Not anymore, Mr. Walter said calmly. He didn't even look at my father. He was busy snapping open the gold latches of his briefcase. Click. Click. The sound was louder than the crackling fire. Mrs. Margaret Hanson retained my services a week ago. We've been quite busy. He pulled out a stack of documents, thick and heavy, and laid them on the table right next to the untouched Christmas roast. The steam from the meat curled around the papers, a bizarre contrast between domestic comfort and legal destruction. Exhibit A, Mr. Walter announced, his voice projecting like he was in a courtroom. He slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany surface toward Sydney. Sydney flinched as if the paper were radioactive. A deed transfer for the Alpine Chalet, dated 3 years ago, Walter narrated. Signed by Isabella Hanson. Or rather, signed by someone attempting to copy her signature. He pulled out a second document. And this is a forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the signature is a clumsy forgery. It notes a 99% probability that the handwriting belongs to one Sydney Hanson Miller. The room went dead silent. I looked at the paper in front of my sister. I recognized the loop of the L. It wasn't mine. It was hers. The same loop she used when she signed birthday cards to me, usually containing a $20 gift card and a passive-aggressive note about how I should buy some decent makeup. Sydney gasped, shrinking back into her velvet chair. She looked like a child caught stealing candy, except the candy was $1 million property. I just did what Dad told me to, she squeaked, her eyes darting between me and our father. He said it was just paperwork. He said Isabella wouldn't mind because she doesn't understand these things. I stared at her. I don't understand that I own a house. I don't understand that you stole my identity. Exhibit B, Mr. Walter continued, bulldozing right over her excuses. He slid a much thicker stack of papers toward Ryan. These were bank statements. Rows and rows of numbers. The account records for the Hanson Family Trust, Walter said. We traced the rent payments from the chalet. Brandon's parents were very punctual. $6,000, every first of the month. He adjusted his glasses. Now, according to your parents, Isabella, this money was being managed for your future. Let's see where the management went. He ran a finger down the page. A lease on a Range Rover autobiography. Tuition for a social media brand building retreat in Bali for Sydney. A membership at the Whispering Pines Country Club. He paused, looking up with a raised eyebrow. And significant, repeated transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange that has, I believe, recently declared bankruptcy. Ryan slumped in his chair. He looked physically smaller, like the air had been let out of him. The evidence was irrefutable. It was laid out in black and white, a paper trail of their greed and incompetence. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had wasted it. They had burned it on vanity and bad bets while I was choosing between buying groceries or paying my heating bill. I felt a wave of nausea. All those times I asked for help, all those times I swallowed my pride and asked my dad for a loan to fix my car, and he gave me a lecture on fiscal responsibility. He was lecturing me while wearing a watch bought with my rent money. And finally, Mr. Walter said, his voice dropping. The temperature in the room seemed to dip with it. Exhibit C. He reached into a separate, protective folder and pulled out a single document inside a plastic sleeve. It looked old. The edges were charred black, and the paper was yellowed and brittle. We found this, he said, looking directly at me, his eyes softening for the first time. In the bottom of a safe deposit box your father emptied this morning in a panic. It seems he missed one. Or perhaps he kept it as a trophy. He handed the document to me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. It was a letter. The letterhead was familiar. It was from the Parsons School of Design. It was dated 5 years ago. Dear Isabella, I read, my voice barely a whisper. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the graphic design program with a full merit scholarship. The world stopped. I looked up, tears blurring my vision. The room swam in a watery haze. You told me I didn't get in, I whispered. The memory was so vivid it hurt. I remembered running to the mailbox every day for weeks. I remembered my mother meeting me at the door one afternoon, a sad look on her face, telling me the rejection letter had come and she had thrown it away to spare my feelings. I remembered crying in my room for 3 days. I remembered giving up on art. I remembered taking the job at the call center because I thought I wasn't good enough for anything else. You told me I wasn't good enough, I said, my voice rising, cracking with 5 years of suppressed grief. We couldn't let you leave. Elizabeth cried out, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. We needed you here. Who would have taken care of us? Who would have been the buffer? If you left, the family dynamic would have fallen apart. Taken care of you? I stared at her in horror. I was 21. I had a full ride. I had a way out. And you would have left us behind. Ryan shouted, suddenly finding his voice. You would have gone to New York and become one of those liberal elites who look down on their families. We were protecting you from yourself. Helped? I whispered. You burned my future. You literally burned it. I looked at the charred edges of the letter. You kept me small. You kept me poor. You kept me doubting my own talent just so you could keep me around as what? A punching bag? A servant? The realization hit me with the force of an avalanche. My life, my struggle, my doubt, my failure, it wasn't real. It was manufactured. They had engineered my smallness to feed their largeness. They needed me to be the loser so they could feel like winners. I looked at Mr. Walter. I wiped the tears from my face. They were hot and angry. What are my options? I asked. Civilly, Walter said, clasping his hands behind his back, we can sue for fraud, embezzlement, conversion of assets, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages would be substantial. He paused, looking at my parents. Criminally, well. Forgery, wire fraud, and grand larceny carry significant prison sentences. Especially given the amount involved. It's well over the threshold for a felony. Ryan looked up, sheer terror in his eyes. The bluster was gone. The arrogance was gone. He was just a scared old man who knew he was cornered. Bella, please, he whimpered. You wouldn't. You wouldn't put your own father in jail. Think about the family. Think about the scandal. I looked at the charred letter in my hand. It smelled faintly of old smoke, the scent of the life I should have had. I looked at the luxury around me, the crystal glasses, the silk curtains, all bought with my stolen life. I wouldn't, I said slowly. Ryan let out a breath of relief. But the prosecutor might, I finished. The room descended into chaos. It was her idea. Ryan shouted, jumping up and pointing a shaking finger at my mother. She's the one who said Isabella would leave us. She's the one who burned the letter in the fireplace. I just wanted to invest the money. You coward. Elizabeth shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of ugly rage. You spent the rent money. You're the one who lost it all on those stupid crypto coins. You told me it was a sure thing. You told me we'd double Isabella's money before she ever found out. Dad made me sign the deed. Sydney wailed, putting her hands over her ears. He threatened to cut off my credit cards. He said it was just a technicality. I didn't know. It was the crab bucket in full effect. They were climbing over each other, clawing and biting, desperate to escape the consequences of their collective actions. They were willing to throw each other into the fire to save their own skin. Stop it! I yelled. My voice cut through their noise like a knife. Just stop. They froze, panting, looking at me. I don't care whose idea it was, I said, my voice steady now, cold as the snow outside. You all benefited. You all lived in luxury while I ate ramen in a basement. You all watched me struggle. You watched me cry over bills. And you did nothing. I turned to Mr. Walter. Give me the invoice. He handed me a document. I slammed it onto the table in front of Ryan. $2,400,000, I said. Ryan's eyes bulged. What? That's impossible. Restitution for the rent, I listed, ticking the items off on my fingers. Interest calculated at market rate. Punitive damages. And compensation for the scholarship you stole. That is the price of my life that you took. We don't have that kind of money. Ryan gasped. The liquid assets are low, the market is down. Then you'll sell everything, I said coldly. The cars. The jewelry. The club memberships. This furniture. I don't care. You will liquidate every asset you have until that number is met. And, I added, stepping closer to the table, you will vacate this chalet. Tonight. Tonight? Elizabeth whispered, clutching her chest. But it's Christmas Eve. It's snowing. We've had wine, we can't drive. I know, I said. I walked here in the snow because my car wouldn't start. I walked 3 miles in the freezing cold to get to this dinner. I picked up the charred letter and placed it gently in my pocket. Now you can walk out in it. My mother looked at me, searching for the daughter she thought she could manipulate, the girl who always apologized. She didn't find her. That girl died the moment I saw the charred letter. Isabella, please, Sydney cried, tears ruining her spray tan. Where will we go? I hear the motel on the highway has vacancies, I said. It's about, $60 a night. You might have to share a room. It'll be a good bonding experience. Mr. Walter, I said, turning my back on them. Please ensure they don't take anything that belongs to the house. I want an inventory. With pleasure, Mr. Walter said, pulling out his phone. I have a security team waiting in the SUV outside. I'll have them escort the former occupants off the premises. I walked over to the fireplace. I felt the warmth on my face. Behind me, I heard the sounds of shuffling, of sobbing, of heavy coats being pulled on. I didn't turn around. I listened to the front door open, heard the howl of the wind, and then, the heavy thud of the door closing. Silence returned to the chalet. But this time, it wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of peace. Grandma Margaret walked over to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me, watching the flames dance. You did the hard thing, she said softly. I did the necessary thing, I replied. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, like a heavy coat had been taken off my shoulders. Are you okay? She asked. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 26 years, the air didn't feel thin. It felt rich. It felt mine. No, I said honestly. I'm not okay. But I'm free. 1 year later. The fire crackled in the stone hearth of the Alpine chalet. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the mountains in white, just like it had that night. But inside, the energy was different. The stiff, museum-like furniture was gone. In its place were comfortable, mismatched armchairs, drafting tables covered in blueprints, and bean bags scattered on the rugs. The air smelled of coffee and oil paint, not expensive perfume and lies. I sat in the main armchair, a sketchbook on my lap. The design for the new community center was almost finished. Penny for your thoughts? Grandma Margaret asked, walking in from the kitchen. She handed me a mug of hot chocolate, the cheap kind with the little marshmallows, just the way I liked it. Just thinking, I said, smiling as I took the mug. About how quiet it is. Peace is expensive, she said, sitting down opposite me. But you bought it. With interest, I added. Ryan and Elizabeth were currently awaiting trial for fraud. The investigation had uncovered more than just the stolen rent. It turned out my father had been managing a few other clients' money with the same creativity he used on mine. Sydney had filed for bankruptcy. Brandon, realizing the cash cow was actually a debt-ridden liability, had divorced her 3 months ago. They were gone from my life. Completely. Permanently. I had blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media. I didn't hate them anymore. I just didn't need them. But I hadn't just kept the money. The scholarship fund launches tomorrow, I said, looking down at my sketch. The Phoenix Fund, Grandma said, nodding approvingly. For students whose families tried to clip their wings. Exactly, I said. We've already had 300 applicants. I was reading the essays last night. Grandma, it's heartbreaking. Kids who were told they weren't good enough. Kids whose parents spent their college funds on gambling or vacations. Kids who were kicked out for being who they are. I looked out the window at the snow-covered pines. I just need someone to believe in them, I whispered. Like you believed in me. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a builder. I was using the bricks they had thrown at me to build a foundation for others. You did good, Bella, Grandma said, reaching out to pat my hand. You turned a crime scene into a sanctuary. No, I said, closing my sketchbook with a satisfying snap. I looked at the fire, burning bright and hot. I turned a cage into a key. If this story reminded you of your own strength, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what's the one dream you're never giving up on, no matter who tells you it's impossible? I read every single one.